Hello and welcome to this Year 9 webinar on descriptive writing. Now, there are three key learning aims. Firstly, engaging readers using sensory description. Secondly, using descriptive techniques. And then finally, understand the drop, zoom, flash, echo method in order to structure descriptive writing. Now, in terms of Year 9 writing, descriptive writing, this is a specific assignment. Describe a street in Victorian London. Now, first of all, let's have a look at the picture that will provide the inspiration, the visual stimulus for our writing. As you can see, this is a wonderful image of a street in Victorian London. And there are so many aspects. You've got things that tower above in the sky, and you've got all sorts of different details at street level. And as a Year 9 writer, you will start to think about which aspects you want to focus on. So I would imagine that you may well think about this person. He looks like a pauper, someone who is begging in the middle of the street. Perhaps he's even doing some kind of song or poem or performance in order to earn money. And this character could be really interesting in terms of descriptive writing. You may also focus on this character. In my opinion, he looks quite sinister, quite unpleasant, quite frightening, quite mysterious. There would be quite a lot of things for us to describe if we were to focus on him. You may, however, want to look at something that is brighter and focus on the light. The fact that this lamp, street lamp, is in 3, the fact that you've got this very bright and inviting shop may be a really nice thing to describe. You may want to describe one of these carriages. They're called hansom cabs, I think, or hackney cabs. These carriages, and the fact that it's kind of trotting quite slowly at the end of the day, this evening, perhaps dusk time, as it's kind of trotting home. You may well think about this wonderful image of Big Ben and this imposing clock and clock face that's kind of towering over things. You may well want to describe the smog and the smoke and the smell and the taste of it even, that really captures that sense of pollution in Victorian London. You may well want to look at perhaps, rather than just individuals, think about a crowd. This is quite an interesting crowd because you have someone who looks very destitute, quite desperate, leaning against the lamppost, some passers-by there, and a group of perhaps young men staring at a newspaper, looking at the latest news. Perhaps it's some kind of news about war or something else that they're getting excited about. And then here, you may want to add a character peering out of these windows, perhaps someone. This is a library, perhaps it's an apartment, a residential place, to add someone who's really kind of spying and looking at this scene. Or you may even want to have something like a town hall or an opera that's going on in the middle of this London street. So the task is describe a street in Victorian London, but as ever with any piece of descriptive writing, we have to add imagination. We have to think, right, what could be happening? What emotions might be here? What could the people be feeling? What is there that I can really think about to add and build the atmosphere and the mood of this descriptive piece? And you'd also think, perhaps I should write in first person narrative. That's really taking the role of one of the characters. So it might be someone who's a beggar, might be someone who's more distinguished, it might be one of the carriage drivers, it could be someone who's walking home. But it's from the first person, someone who's within the scene, one of the characters experiencing the street firsthand. And it's using I and my and we, and really just not just describing the surroundings and the people, but also describing the feelings that they experience. Or you may well think you want to describe from an omniscient third person narrative perspective. So that is someone who is all-knowing, who can see the future and the past, who can see lots of different characters' viewpoints, who really understands all the different feelings and the perspectives that are there. And you have a real wide range if you're using third person, omniscient or all-knowing as a descriptive perspective. So today, some of the work that I'm going to show you is written from the first person perspective, but from your own writing, you may well prefer to use the third person. Now let's talk about sensory description. Obviously, we understand, we experience the world through our five senses. And so in your description, you have to make sure that you're appealing to or referring to the five senses. We're going to use slightly more accurate terminology. So instead of just talking about our sense of hearing, we'll talk about auditory description. So things that tinkle or scratch or thunder or thump or thud or buzz or clang. We're going to talk also about things that appeal to our sight or that refer to sight, visual description, things perhaps that are shiny or glossy or emerald or red or smudged or misty or colourless. And it also can refer to shape and size in your Victorian London street. Also, perhaps you're thinking about the sense of touch, tactile description, things that are spiky or hot or wet or bumpy or rough or jagged or grimy or slimy or velvety or powdery in your description. Or you may well talk about the sense of taste. So gustatory description, things that are tangy or salty or sour or peppery or lemony or minty or fruity or spicy. Or the sense of smell, olfactory description, things that are mildewed or stale or floral or smoky or rotten or tangy or lemony. All of that would be relevant. Now, when you're describing through the senses, sensory description, your senses might be repulsed. So it might repel your hearing or sight, or they might be attracted to. So it might be attractive or appealing or pleasant to touch or taste or smell. Now, in your description of a Victorian London street, you might have something like this as an example of sensory description. Flickering amber flames crackled as I made my way down the sooty street that was filling up with clouds of choking dust. The bitter smoke of factory chimneys mingled with a rancid odour of rotting flowers. As I peered up, I saw pairs of grimy, soiled curtains, but I also saw gleaming glass and silky satin in other windows. I heard the clang and jolt of rusty wheels of hansom cabs struggling over bumpy pavestones, splashing through slimy puddles. So you can see there, I'm trying to appeal to all the five different senses, but also some of them are repulsive as well. So you can see the flickering and the amber and appealing to a sense of sight. But alongside that, you've got crackled and sooty, appealing to a sense of hearing and the sense of touch, and the choking dust, appealing to that kind of sense of taste and smell that's kind of intermingled. I'm trying to continue that sense of smell and taste with the bitter smoke and the rancid odor and the chimneys and the flowers are all mingling together, but also the sense of tactile imagery and description with the silky and the gleaming kind of counterpoised and intertwined, and then the sense of hearing, auditory description with a jolt and a clang, but also again appealing or repelling a sense of touch with the slimy and bumpy puddles and pavestones. So I've really tried to integrate all five senses into that piece of description to make it really vivid and exciting for readers, that they really feel as they're right there in the middle of this London Victorian street. Let's think about description that's indirect. Now, you may well have heard of show, don't tell. It just means that you're adding an extra level of descriptive detail to your writing. Instead of something being really obvious and being explicit and you just telling she was incredibly nervous, you'd add that level of descriptive detail, hands shaking and trembling, the whole body convulsing uncontrollably with shivers, to really show the nervousness. Now, what would that look like for your description of your Victorian London street? Well, the first one is really about this kind of slow, calm evening pace where the horse-drawn carriages are moving slowly. Now, that would be entirely appropriate to say horse-drawn carriages moved slowly, but really to add that next level of descriptive detail where you're really showing and adding a lots of specific description. You may write something like, skinny horses with balding flanks nuzzled the grounds for scraps of fallen food trampled underfoot, whilst lethargic carriage drivers hypnotized by the slow, steady clip-clop, stared into the air, imagining a warm bed at the end of the dark, moonlit street. So here you're really thinking about those skinny horses that barely have any energy to walk, looking for food, and how these poor, tired carriage drivers are just longing to get to bed. And that's why they're moving slowly. So you're adding that extra level of descriptive detail to really show, not just tell. What about if you wanted to show that the people are poor and hungry? In the image that we have many examples of beggars. So it would be appropriate for you to write something like people were poor and hungry to describe the scene, but to add that next level of descriptive detail to really show what you meant. You might write something like, emaciated children reached out their bony fingers towards rushing crowds of passersby who ignored them mercilessly. Their concave stomachs growled, and the rumbling wind made them shiver in oily rags. So really you're adding that level that you're talking about the fact that they were emaciated with bony fingers and concave stomachs. You're really adding that level of description that shows that they are poor and hungry and even starving. What about the group of men reading the newspaper excitedly? Again, it would be appropriate for you to write, men were reading the newspaper excitedly, and you're stating something, but to add that extra level of descriptive detail, you might say something like, 3 pairs of bright eyes were fixed on freshly painted black and white pages as they chortled and squawked and guffawed at each delightful image, eagerly scanning the next sheet for the next joke. So you can see here, you're talking about their bright eyes. So that's about the excitement. You're talking about them chortling and guffawing and squawking. That shows that sense of delight. And scanning pages eagerly for the next joke shows that they're excited about reading the newspaper. So instead of just stating it, you're adding that next level of descriptive detail to really engage and fascinate your readers. Okay, let's think now about other types of descriptive techniques. So the first one would be triple A. That would stand for adjective, adverb, and alliteration. Adjectives describe nouns, adverbs describe verbs, and alliteration repeat the same sound at the beginning. So triple A really energizes your description. The next one would be MOPES, or figurative language, and that stands for metaphor, showing something is something else, so it's indirect comparison. Onomatopoeia, that's sound effects. Personification, giving human traits and human characteristics to something that's non-living. Exaggeration, over the top language or hyperbole. And simile, saying like or as a direct comparison. So what would that look like in your writing for a Victorian street? Well, let's think about triple A first. This is the sinister character that looked quite frightening. There's a sense of terror and mystery with this character, I felt, as I looked at the image. So you might have something like this. With stealthy strides and furtive glances, the distinctive gentleman stalked towards the well-lit shop surreptitiously. Firmly he gripped the grim metallic cane, and he wielded it like a weapon. His hard and frosty demeanour and his sultry, sinister presence were a harsh contrast to the inviting luminosity that glowed radiantly from the store. You can see here where the alliteration is: stealthy strides, gripped, grim, wielded like a weapon. And you can see the adverbs surreptitiously, radiantly, as well as all sorts of adjectives to describe this sinister character. What about mopes? Well, a metaphor could be about the serpent of contaminated smoke expanding itself across the sky. The onomatopoeia might be the steady clip-clop of hooves that clanged and tolled through the twilight. You can really hear the sound effects of those words. Personification may well be about the angry bells wailing in distress with frustrated, hollow chimes calling for justice. So really giving that sense of anger and frustration in the bells, giving them human characteristics. Exaggeration may well be the carriage drivers sat like spellbound chimps, hypnotized by a million spells. And simile might be about the bitter wind making the ragged pedestrians shiver like loathsome frogs that had been robbed of their swamp. So really comparing the poor pedestrians in the cold with loathsome frogs that had been kicked out of a swamp is adding again that level of engagement using descriptive techniques. Right, for the last part of this webinar, I want to talk about structure using the drop, zoom, flash, and echo method to write a whole piece. You start with drop. Drop means that you drop the reader into the mood. Straight away, you give them something active, something interesting, some kind of movement, something that makes them want to read on. The zoom is thinking about specific elements. So you're zooming in and describing those elements in more detail. The flash is a transition. It's some kind of flashback, and hopefully in your flashback, you can show an opposite tone to the mood established. So if this piece is quite slow, quite calm, quite lethargic, it's dusk, you give a different or an opposite tone. And then the echo would be to return to the scene, to give a kind of a cyclical structure. So essentially, drop, zoom, flash, and echo is this formula. You have your narrative hook, so grab our attention, plus zooming into the scene, so getting closer and closer, plus a contrast, so something opposite, equals showing your skill as a writer. So your readers can see you can grab our attention, you can zoom into specific details, you can give contrasting moods, and that shows your skill. So what would that look like for your assignment of describing a Victorian London street? Well, you might drop us into the smells, the tobacco, the smog, the manure. You might drop us into the sights of the lamps or stray cats and rats in gutters. And then you might zoom closer into different people, perhaps the man with a walking cane, the gentleman with the newspaper, the beggars who are imploring. And then for a flash, perhaps you'd have a flashback of beggar boys. Maybe they are stealing bread and you have some kind of frenzied chase that's a stark contrast, something very opposite to this kind of slow, sultry evening mood. And then to echo, you would go back to the beginning, you'd go back to the moonlight, you go back to the smog, you go back to the flickering lamps, you go back to the carriages to echo everything you started with at the beginning. So what would that look like as a whole piece? Because drop, zoom, flash, and echo is really about trying to structure your whole piece of description. Well, it may well look something like this. So in your first paragraph, your drop, you might write something like this. The serpent of contaminated smoke expanded itself and squirmed across the sky. This earthy stench of rotting manure was mixed with a bitter smoke of factory chimneys and mingled with a rancid odour of rotting flowers. Flickering amber flames crackled as I made my way down the city street that was filled with clouds of choking dust. And as I peered up, I saw pairs of grimy soiled curtains, but I also saw gleaming glass and silky satin in other windows. I heard the clang and the jolt of the rusty wheels of hansom cars struggling over bumpy pavestones and splashing through slimy puddles. Hairless stray cats trying to outwit grey silky rats scurrying in the open gutters. So I've really tried to drop the reader into the action so you get a really good sense of London, particularly using sensory imagery and sensory description. Then for the next bit, it's the zoom. I'm zooming into specific people, specific men and specific characters in the story. With stealthy strides and furtive glances, one distinctive gentleman stalked his way to a well-lit shop surreptitiously. Firmly he gripped the grim metallic cane, which he wielded like a weapon. His hard and frosty demeanour and his sultry sinister presence were a stark contrast to the inviting luminosity that glowed radiantly from the store. Across the street from this disturbing gentleman were three other gentlemen, three pairs of bright eyes fixed on freshly printed black and white pages that chortled, squawked, and guffawed at each delightful image. So you can see that I'm zooming into different characters, zooming into the beggars as well. And then the third one, I'm going to have my flash. This is a flashback. Earlier that day, the same emaciated children had been taunted by the irresistible aroma of warm bread. They had snatched a loaf from the unsuspecting hands of the baker. The angry merchant gave chase, upsetting market stalls, knocking over the flower stand, barging innocent shoppers and charging through the street at high speed. So I've had a really contrasting idea to this calm, lethargic, sultry evening. And then finally, later in the evening, the hazy moonlight peeped through the acrid chimney smoke, as if it too were trying to avoid the rancid odour of manure and flowers. Damp mirrors of rain reflected the flickering amber, and as the rattling carriages echoed into the dusk, drivers stared into the air, imagining a downy bed at the end of the dark street. So you can see here I've used dropping us straight into the action, into the feeling through sensory description. I've used zoom, really zooming into the different characters, using AAA, using mopes. I've used flash to have a very different scene where the baker is charging towards the boys, giving chase because they've stolen some bread. And I've used echo, going back to some of the ideas at the beginning. So I hope that now you would have the confidence of writing your own description of a scene in Victorian London. Don't forget to use sensory imagery. Make sure you use all the different techniques, AAA and mopes, to really add that engaging detail. Don't forget to show and not tell. You add that extra level of specific detail, and use the drop, zoom, flash, echo method to structure your whole piece. I hope that you found this helpful. Do join me next time, and thank you for watching.